Good afternoon, and thanks so much for joining us for our conversation about social and emotional learning during the pandemic. My name is Aneesh Sohoni, and I'm the Executive Director of Teach for America in Chicago and Northwest Indiana, and we are grateful to host today's conversation alongside the Susan Crown Exchange. By a quick way of logistics, this will be about an hour-long Zoom webinar conversation. That means the only people you'll see on the screen will be me and our panelists. The chat function is disabled, but you will be able to submit questions via the Q&A feature located at the bottom of your screen. So please do submit your questions along the way, as we'll have plenty of time to get to those. So over the past few years, it seems that researchers and educators alike have been placing a greater emphasis, or for those of you who've been working in the space for a while, you would say a re-emphasis on the social emotional development and social emotional wellness of our students. Non-academic skills are, of course, critical to the successes that we aspire to have with our students, and the trauma as a related cousin that so many of our students face in Chicago has a critical impact on their development as learners. Of course, as we think about the pandemic and continued racial injustice, the need to support our students' social and emotional well-being and being responsive to their trauma is not new, but has been heightened. Like so many areas in life right now, what keeps me grounded and centered amidst immense challenge is the opportunity for innovation. The opportunity to not just move our education system back to where it was, but the opportunity to move our education system forward into a new dimension and into a new way of being, given the challenges that we all face. I know that's possible, especially when we take on this work together, collectively, and in partnership, working shoulder to shoulder. At Teach for America, we have been working with our partners to understand the needs of our students and families, and working with them to make sure that they, alongside the educators that support them, have what they need. Which is why I'm excited to bring you into the conversation today. I want to thank our panelists for their time and their dedication to their craft. We are all better off for it, and we're going to learn a lot. And I also want to thank and hand over now to our host and moderator for today, Kevin Connors. Kevin is a Teach for America alum and now a senior director at the Susan Crown Exchange, and he'll lead us through the rest of the conversation. Thanks so much, Kevin.
Well, Aneesh, thank you for the introduction, and a big thank you to Teach for America for inviting such a dynamic group together today. TFA's role in this region and across the country is more important than ever. I'm certainly a proud alum. As Aneesh said, I'm the senior director at the Susan Crown Exchange. Our foundation is focused on the skills young people need to thrive in a constantly evolving world. For much of the past decade, and especially over the last 6 months, social and emotional skills have emerged as a key priority for our foundation. So I'm really proud and honored to be here to help facilitate this discussion. I also want to say welcome to everyone who's joining us. Much like the panel, our guests on the call have very diverse backgrounds, and I think it's a great reminder that there is a role to play for everyone, and together through events like this and so many others, we're making progress. Today, our goal is to help you leave with some tangible takeaways, insights, actions that you can take in your own life, whether personal or professional, to help the ball move forward. We'll have about 25 minutes of conversation, and then, as Aneesh said, time for Q&A at the end. With that, I'm honored to introduce our panelists today. We're joined by 4 leaders in the education system who all call Chicago home. Each has been studying or solving those key questions that really brought us here today. How is the pandemic impacting social and emotional development of our students, and what can we do to support them at this time? So before we dive into the conversation, I'm going to ask each of our panelists, please quickly introduce yourself, and in a word or phrase, let us know how you're feeling at this time. We're about to embark on a new school year, one that has been recently changed to virtual, at least for the first couple of months, and would love to hear how you're feeling. Orrin, I'm going to ask you to start us off.
Thanks, Kevin. So my name is Orrin Murray, and for the past 7 years, I've worked at Urban Education Institute in U Chicago Impact Division, and a couple of things that we've worked on in that unit fairly recently our new survey called Cultivate and a resilience curriculum known as Undefeated Mind. And my work in those spaces, I think, has sort of re-energized my interest in the social, emotional, and academic development of students. The one word that I'd like to share in terms of how I'm feeling is optimistic.
All right, thank you. Shayna, let's go to you.
Hi, I'm Shayna Boyd. I've been in education for 10 years now. I'm currently a 7th and 8th grade ELA teacher on the city's southwest side at Asburn Elementary. In addition to that, I'm also a captain for Educators for Excellence, leading work crafting recommendations on social emotional learning. And I guess my word or phrase would be ready, in terms of ready for this school year to get going.
Thank you, Shayna. Efrain, how about you?
Hi, my name is Efrain Martinez, and I'm currently the principal of Orozco Academy. I have been serving Chicago Public Schools now for 14 years, and our school makes a big emphasis on social emotional learning. How I feel is the way you're gonna feel me. I feel very enthusiastic because I'm about to learn from one of the best minds in our city on how we are going to solve this issue together. Right? There's one profession where you have to get better so you can move children, is this profession.
Thanks, Efrain. And Chrissy, why don't you finish us off?
Yeah, hi everyone. I am Christy Gratz, and I am the Director of Leadership and Learning at Teach for America here in Chicago, Northwest Indiana. And so one of the things that I support within that role is our vision and strategy around student academic and social and emotional outcomes, and really ensuring that we're providing teachers with the development opportunities that are in service of those student outcomes. I would say, I can't land on one specific word, but I'll say right now, eager, because in the middle of all of this, I think is an opportunity, and an opportunity to work together and reimagine how we can collectively strengthen our own social and emotional competence and well-being that's required for all of us to create a just society for the future.
Thank you, Chrissy. Thank you, everyone. And I got to say that dose of optimism feels so important right now in the current state. So let's talk about the current state a little bit. Of course, this conversation takes place in the context of the largest global economic and health crisis we've had in a century, COVID-19, fight for racial justice, the persistent problems of inequality. They're all heightened at this time, as Aneesh said. Schools, including CPS, are going back virtually. At least for the first quarter and perhaps beyond. There's uncertainty still around the virus and the future of that. And of course, there's increasing anxiety around this November's election. Quite simply, over the last 6 months, our lives and livelihoods have been uprooted, and young people were not immune to that. So when we asked them, DoSomething.org is a youth organization who has been surveying young people since the pandemic began. When we ask them, they are telling us the same, that they are concerned about the current state, and that's why conversations like these are so critical. So a few statistics that I pulled out that are maybe indicative of where young people's state of minds are today and can help frame this conversation. 42% of young people say the strongest feeling they have about virtual learning is disconnection. 58% say their mental health is now their biggest concern with virtual learning. Only 20% are feeling hopeful at the moment. That was an all-time high, also a statistic that came from their July survey. 72% of young people ages 13 to 25 believe the worst is yet to come. That was also in July, so perhaps some foresight about school being shut down. And then lastly, in light of COVID-19 and the current protests around racial justice, they asked, have your views on America changed? 57% said they had, and most noted that the reason being was that they didn't realize the scope of the issues facing the nation. So in some ways, young people are growing up fast, and in the case of the pandemic, growing up without the communities and the people closest to them to help them through these tough times. And so, Orrin, I want to start with you from a research perspective. You've been studying these issues around social and emotional development for a long time. What are you seeing as it pertains to SEL in the pandemic? Or what should we know from the research as we move forward in our work?
Thanks, Kevin. So I want to start out with something that you alluded to in your opening remarks. And that is that a lot of the stuff that the current research is highlighting are things that are not necessarily new, right? So we know, for example, that relationships matter. And yet we have to sort of relearn this. And this is part of what this research is beginning to tell us, particularly in the space of some of the work that is looking at students' particular mindsets and how those mindsets have an impact on their ability to engage with the work that at that point was in classrooms, but now classrooms, look very different in terms of this remote learning space that we're in now. But it's important to sort of reiterate this, and that is that relationships matter. And why? Fundamentally, schooling, teaching, learning, these are all social things, right? We do them either directly in contact with others, whether it's our peers or our teachers, or even in the spaces where people are engaging in this sort of remote learning, asynchronous, where they have materials. Those materials weren't, dropped out of the sky by some inanimate object. They were created by people. They're about people. All of this work is about how we connect to and relate to one another. And it feels like over the probably last 50, 70 years, the learnings of Dewey and others that have sort of pointed to this sort of core notion of, the social aspects and the relational aspects have gotten lost in the face of the sort of technical, let's make sure that teachers know math, let's make sure that teachers know their subject area so that they can then transfer those content areas onto students. What research is beginning to reveal to us or re-reveal to us is that things like engagement happen because of the relationships that teachers and students have. And by focusing on this notion of the sort of the social and emotional and relationship development, we can move things a lot further than we have where people have sort of pulled back and said, those kind of things matter in maybe lower elementary, kindergarten. They don't matter in middle school. They don't matter in high school. Lord knows they don't matter in college. They clearly matter. So I think, for those of you who are not familiar with the Consortium on School Research's work, you can go to the University of Chicago's website and explore things like Foundations of Young Adult Success or Becoming Effective Learners. Both these publications are really sort of combination lit reviews and synthesis of what the field has said about what's going on in this space. And they begin to point us to a direction that circles around this notion that, yes, students' mindsets matter, but the way students develop their mindset is through a relationship with their adults and teachers, and including, and I think that's also important to point out, with their caregivers and families at home. So relationships matter. That's what the research is telling us.
Thanks, Orrin. Efrain, I want to ask you to chime in here from the perspective of a school leader, right? An elementary school serving K through 8. You span multiple age groups. Orrin alluded to a few of those. What's some of the work you're doing at Orozco to address the social and emotional needs of your students?
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank Dr. Murray to talk about the multiplicity of information you can reach at the University of Chicago website. Regardless of what subject you're going to teach, it's good when you are applying to schools to see that data so you are properly informed of what you are going to, of the people you're going to serve and what are the needs of that community. It's important to know rather than just apply anywhere and go. I believe in Orozco, we have used multiple approaches. Of course, we started with CASEL, and then we had an opportunity to go to get some trauma responsive support at the University of Chicago, TREP, and we have brought all these strategies and skills to use with students, but we realized that we have to go way beyond the needs of the discipline needs of the school. And like Dr. Murray said, the relationship with that student, in specific in Orozco, we address the emotional intelligence of the student. We have noticed that, we have learned, we have an emotional intelligence committee, and we have learned from research that this has been implemented in plenty of urban schools that are just like the schools in Chicago. And when what the research is saying, or we are doing, is that when the student can understand his or her emotions and they can address them and handle them, you already have a better world there, because what we have is a misunderstanding all the time, a clash of cultures and ways that we bring from home, and we come into a community, right? Assuming that everybody has exactly the same rules and everybody looks at the eye or doesn't look at the eye. We need to be culturally competent. So what Orozco wants to do is go deeper into the emotional intelligence of the teacher, because the students cannot be first if we put the teachers last.
A quick follow-up for you. So I'm curious, when it comes to addressing the emotional intelligence of the students, what does that look like in practice? What have you done with your school community actually on the ground?
Thank you. So we have been piloting a program that allows the teacher to have the vocabulary to teach the student, right? Because often the students know how they feel, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they know how to express it. And for that, the teacher has to have the proper support. So we started piloting programs in kindergarten and first grade and second grade, and it was so successful that we are going to do it now up to 8th grade with proper support by the Golden Home Foundation, and a program that they have designed is research-based and all that good thing. The idea is that if we have a foundation that the teacher can use to integrate into the classes, then the teacher feels supported and the student can only benefit.
Thanks. Shayna, I want to bring you into this conversation from a teacher perspective. You're on the front lines and curious almost to do like a before and after. So Ashburn is really well known for its personalized learning model, for building strong relationships with students. And I'm curious how you did that before the pandemic and now what you think that might look like this upcoming school year.
Yeah, so my school is personalized learning, and one of the tools that we use is our curriculum, which is Summit Learning. And through that curriculum, there's a built-in component for mentoring. So as a middle school teacher, it was important that we each get assigned 10 kids. And we meet with these kids every single week. So in the middle of our class, as I'm providing instruction, I might have a small group over here. I might be meeting with a student individually. But at every moment, I'm making plans to meet with my students, to get them engaged, and to check in with them. They also had the opportunity to request an urgent meeting if there was something pressing going on. Now, since remote learning began, we found that was a bit challenging to get that type of interaction, especially when one-on-one is not able, to be done. So I started crafting like Google Hangout spots. So I would have weekly meetings with my kids online. And then we could come together, and usually it was supposed to be 30 minutes. And sometimes we didn't end up being on there for like an hour because they needed that time to talk. So at all times, whether it's remote or in person, what I find myself is that I have to give of myself, that I have to be prepared every single day. And it is exhausting. But every day is a new day, and it's a new opportunity for us to engage. It's important, especially even in these times, to continue to maintain that control and that optimism. Our kids crave a warm demander, and yeah, it's hard to facilitate in that space, but it's definitely possible using tools through Google, through other apps, in order to continue to engage them. So as Orrin said, engagement leads to relationship building, right?
And then in addition to kind of that relationship building, are there other social and emotional needs that you've seen kind of rise through the last 3 months of last school year and that you're kind of anticipating for this upcoming one?
Yes, I've had several students who have lost family members to COVID, as well as one who lost a family member to the civil unrest that's going on. And so I can only expect, given the current climate, given that our rates are going up, that those numbers will continue to go up. And my school, we made sure that, we are responding to any child that is in need. As soon as we find out something, all hands on deck. I think there's a lot of uncertainty, especially with my kids, my kids who are 7th, 8th grade, that are knowledgeable and they're aware of what's going on. They see that their country, as the stats said, that their country is completely different now. It's going to require a lot of energy and effort on the educator's part in order to navigate their trauma. Because even if they are not outwardly speaking about it, it's important to understand that, yes, they are experiencing a generational trauma and that interventions are necessary, even if it doesn't seem to be.
And at Ashburn, is that a school-wide effort?
Yes. So we are officially, at first, we were just 5th through 8th. It'll now be K-8 for personalized learning, which is wonderful.
Chrissy, I want to bring you into this conversation. So you support teachers across the region, particularly new teachers. And I guess I'm curious, one, what you're hearing from them as what are their main concerns? How are they asking to be supported? And then second, I'd love to talk a little bit about teacher well-being and why it's important to support that at this time as well. But first, what are you hearing from new teachers as they enter the school year?
Yeah, quite a few things, especially for given the landscape right now. I would say that if anything, our teachers have shared that as a result of everything that is happening, it's only deepened, I would say, their commitment to their students and the fight for educational equity. They also really miss being in person with their students. They miss those relationships. As we've shared, it's a little harder to do remotely. And so they are working really tirelessly to kind of eliminate some of those barriers, whether it be technology or internet or whatever it may be, in order for students to engage and really access that distance learning. And they are feeling, I would say, a really heightened level of responsibility for doing it right. Although we don't really know what right looks like right now. And they just want to make sure that their students are, despite everything and despite those statistics, they feel taken care of. They feel like they have someone in their corner who's there for them, who cares about them as a person. And that, I would say, is also manifesting in a lot of fatigue and just general stress for educators. And so to that point that you asked about well-being, they are seeking out lots of ways to take care of themselves. I know a few people have mentioned how important it is for just teachers and us as adults to pay attention to and build our own well-being and social and emotional competence, particularly the self-awareness and management and regulation aspects of social emotional learning. And there are obviously lots of studies that show how important it is for teachers to take care of their own well-being, because they are one of the most stressed professions. There's lots of causes to that, and now you add a pandemic, and that is all very much heightened, which can lead to lots of other unintended outcomes. And so some of the things that we have been offering in terms of opportunities is really just making sure that we are providing spaces where teachers can come together, they can connect with one another, and they can build their own capacities around their own well-being and social emotional development so that they can then support their students. And so one of the resources that we have been leveraging is Castle released a roadmap in July, and they have some critical practices. And so in the work that we've been doing, we've been thinking a lot about the critical practice number 2, which is all about taking care of the teachers in this moment. And so that has looked like hosting different spaces that allow them to connect with one another around their well-being or self-care, whether that be like actual development kind of spaces or just spaces for them to come together and engage in social experiences or things that they feel like are going to help them in their own definition of well-being, because that looks very different for each of us. And so providing a variety of options there. And also just making sure that people are aware of and know of the resources that exist and can access those, whether that be in the Chicago community or specific to Teach for America. And then also, I would say that we just finished a series of professional development experiences for teachers to start the school year. And one of the highest rated spaces for those weeks was what they called home teams, which was really just a place for teachers to come together, build relationships with one another, hear from one another, and hear how they're like collectively making sense of this time in the world. And they shared that those spaces were really helpful for them because it helped them understand in knowing that they aren't the only people feeling this way. And it gave them the opportunity to like build the network to collectively learn from one another and lean into the teaching practices that they are learning about and eager to apply.
So much of this seems like building that sense of community is almost more important than ever. Orrin, is that something that shows up in the research as well? Orrin, yeah.
Right, thanks for that notice. So to some extent, yes. So one of the important mindsets that some of this research that I've been, connected with has pointed out is this notion of belonging, right? Do you feel like you belong in this particular classroom? And that makes a difference for engagement, because if you feel like you belong, you're more likely to engage. If you don't feel like you belong, you're more likely to unplug. And when you are meeting in a particular space in a classroom, your body could be there, but you're clearly not there. But as we've moved to this synchronous and asynchronous learning model, that means in many cases, you're just not there. You're not showing up, and so we saw things from the spring, like, attendance rates, well below 40%, and, lots of places that went remote. So community definitely shows up. Yeah.
So Efrain, what are some of the moves you're making as a school leader, someone working with the full community of teachers, to kind of build this sense of belonging after, I think, what was kind of unwelcome news that we were going virtual? I know there's a lot of, uncertainty about that and discomfort, but I know everyone's also aching to be back. So how are you building this sense of camaraderie and community with your teachers at this time?
So it is so important to have peace and calm. And although it might feel like we don't know what we're doing, that is true. We don't know what we're doing because it has never been done. And what we have to consider ourselves is as pioneers. We are in a new century. We are the pioneers, and this is our time to design. What Chrissy mentioned about self-awareness and self-regulation is so important because what is coming to us is a lot of children who have not been together with other children in communities that we call schools, and suddenly they will. And we have to engage them via plastic computers, right? Plastic screens. So we have to learn how to empathize with the families and the students and really see evaluation of students differently. For example, like if students don't show their faces via a video camera, right? We cannot say, if you show it, you get a higher grade, because we have to understand that for an equitable access to education, we don't know what is behind that plastic glass. So we have to properly support our teachers in properly addressing the needs that we have never been able to be trained or be supported because this is brand new. So there's gonna be a lot of flexibility. I feel that when teachers know that reach or that evaluation system is something that is floating in the air, and what matters the most is bring the social emotional learning of all the students together and address them. When we address the child, then we can address the success of the school, because we need to focus on the child. So there's a lot of tender, authentic, intellectual support for teachers so they can be enlightened. So when the students come, they are properly ready to address the needs of students while at the same time being able to go home and live like a normal human being. I think that one advice that new core members have to receive is that the moment you leave your home, you leave your home life home, and you are a teacher. You are the hero for those students. But it goes the other way around too. When you leave the school setting, you have to leave that there. Think about professionals in palliative care and emergency rooms. We are that. We are emergency room workers. So we have to be able to have empathy and leave sympathy underneath the bed for a couple of years.
Shayna, I want to ask you, well, first I'd like to remind the audience, please submit questions to the Q&A for our panel. We'll have some time to read those. But Shayna, I want to ask you, does that ring true to you as a teacher, and how are you kind of approaching this?
Absolutely. Oh, it's a bit of an echo, sorry. Yeah, I wanted to mention this, that both Chrissy and Efrain, they mentioned the need for mental health, right? And I was in a focus group earlier today, and someone stated that in order to have whole children, we need to have whole teachers. And that really resonated with me, especially during this time. I feel like I need to hit the ground running, that I need to have everything prepared, everything fleshed out, but then also be prepared for inevitability. And then just accept that and embrace it, because this is very difficult work. This is new work, and all my teacher friends are joking about the fact that, well, this is all of our first year of teaching. And it is, and that's okay. I think that the expectation from administration, from CPS as a whole, is a bit undefined, but we can navigate through it. And I think that in the coming days, we'll have more and more information, and we'll get through this. I think that if we survive third and fourth quarter, I know that me and my teacher friends, we can get through this as well. Because at the end of the day, we're doing this for our kids. And
it's interesting you use that word survival. I think in many ways that also rings true for folks. I think we also are aiming for success. And I'm curious, in this environment, what does success look like for each of you? How will we know, come the end of the school year that yes, this was a successful year? Those indicators that are present in in-person learning environments aren't necessarily there. And I'm very curious to hear from each of your perspectives what success would look like. Chrissy, why don't we start with you, since you have a pretty wide perspective on the city.
Yeah, I'm thinking about it through a few different lenses, both teachers and students. But despite the different groups, I would say that success is at the end of all of this, people feeling like they were cared for and felt like they were in community with others and that they grew in some way or another. So I know that that's pretty broad, but I think that no matter if it's a student or a teacher, if either one of those people could share either of those things, I would say that would be success for sure.
Ron, how about you? How do you answer that? Efrain, how do you think about that at Orozco? What does success look like?
I thought you mentioned it, and I apologize. For me, success is very simple. We start the year in 0. Everybody is in 0, right? Of course, we have knowledge of what happened in the 3rd and 4th quarter, but right now everybody is online. So we need to ensure that each child in the school is conceptually engaged in the learning. Learning doesn't necessarily mean getting high scores in tests, right? It means students understanding and owning their new reality, right? If a student ends the year hoping that we go back to normal and they have not understood that we are making the normal together, right? If our students leave the school feeling like that, for me, that will be success. Because when we as human beings own our reality, it's only then that we can influence to change it, right? So that authenticity of awareness, situational awareness, will be the success of Orozco at the end of the year.
Shayna, do you think about success differently this year than in years past?
Absolutely. I think, well, the number one thing would be attendance. I mean, attendance has always been a big deal, especially in Chicago public schools. But to engage students from afar is a completely different beast. And so I was fortunate that we were already using a platform that was online. And so our attendance compared to other schools was much higher. And for that, I'm grateful. But now I'm using that as kind of a standard, right? I want my metrics to measure up to that. I think another standard for me of success would be, I mean, how many kids am I engaging on a weekly basis? Are my new students that are coming up to me that I have not met, are they starting to open up to me? Am I building relationships with them? Because if we do go back into the classroom, I need to make sure that a solid foundation has been built. So I'm looking for success in terms of the strength of my relationships with my students. Obviously their attendance. Yes, are they submitting work? But it's more so for me. I think that once that foundation is built, if I have strong relationships with my kids, then everything else will follow.
And then Orrin, I want to ask you from a research perspective, like how do you measure all of this? Shayna seemed like she gave some really good ideas, but if you're a teacher or an administrator trying to come up with new metrics or additional ones this year, how would you measure this from a researcher's perspective?
That's a good question. So, I mean, I think Shayna hit it on the head. The first one is attendance, right? So our kids showing up and consistently showing up, you know, you can't get anything done if no one's there, right? So that feels like it's a pretty baseline model. And then, you know, assuming that people are showing up and that you are getting attendance, then the question needs to sort of go a bit deeper. But, you know, one way to sort of broadly think about this is from a student's perspective, was this a good use of their time? And you can design survey questions to get at specifics of, you know, was this particular engagement with in a group project a good use of my time? Was this particular engagement with asynchronous, synchronous a good use of my time? I mean, you know, I guess at the end of the day, you know, one of the reasons why people, you know, tend to show up for things is because they feel like there's something there for them, right? And so, you know, if we use this sort of baseline of, is this a good use of my time? And it doesn't necessarily mean, you know, because I was able to goof off or it was, you know, funny or these kind of things. You know, it turns out that once you get kids to be curious and engage in social studies, engage in reading, and engage in, you know, problem solving in terms of math, that funny kind of stuff, that's just like popcorn, and the rest of it is the sort of the real sort of meat and potatoes of what's going on. So I think, you know, there are a number of surveys already that are designed to try and sort of plug into this notion of, was this relevant to me as an individual, as, you know, as a person? And do I see the relevance of this work, you know, more broadly? And if we sort of dive into those, I think those would be measures to determine whether or not this was successful.
So each of you in some ways also alluded to academics here. We haven't talked too much about the academic side of this. And I would love to hear, you know, Chrissy, Efrain, Shayna, from your perspectives. What advice are you giving to your teachers or fellow school leaders when it comes to balancing the need to support academics this year with SEL? We've heard about different theories or models, right? Some are believing that we need to triage academics immediately when we return to school because we missed so much last year. Others are thinking we need to triage SEL and focus there for the first, you know, few weeks, for example, of the school year. How are you navigating that in your own classrooms or buildings or with your own teachers? What advice would you give to those who are listening? Efrain, if you want to, or Shayna, if you want to start.
Okay, yeah. I'm actually taking on social science as well this year for my 8th graders, which is the perfect opportunity given everything that's going on. And so when I think about academics and SEL, a lot of times I hear people separating the two. SEL is just like a 10-15 minute block in the morning. You might have a peace circle at the end of the day, but it's an infusion, it's an integration, it is an everyday, all day thing. And you can't have one without the other. So I'm using this opportunity with ELA and social science to craft units to allow for students to engage and speak about the things that they are seeing, that they are feeling. And I think that could be done whether it's math class or anything else, but you have to craft spaces within the curriculum, whatever it may be. But within your units, you need to craft spaces for students to truly engage, allow for student voice, because that SEL component, it can easily be infused with pretty much any activity there is.
I second that motion. I think that is no longer something that supports us in the classroom when we're teaching. Oh, student misbehaved. Let me go and get the strategy here and use it into the classroom. What it needs to happen is that you need to prepare your curriculum with both of them attached to each other. And one time a lesson can start with the SEL component, not necessarily with the ELA component. But it's absolutely essential, especially that we're gonna start remote learning, that you involve students in the rules of etiquette when learning online, right? Because if you just give them the rules, they want to break them. But if they co-create the rules with you, then they will own them. And remember, do not discipline students because they don't show your face. You are the performer. You are the showmaker. You better show your face and do everything you need to do, but always have an equitable lenses with everything that you do by providing 2 or more ways for students to demonstrate learning. Remember, if the student feels that they are learning, like Dr. Murray said, they are going to feel that they want to come back because they feel successful. And it's not to make it easy, but they need to feel successful. So work for that and you will engage your students.
Interesting. You hear a lot of traditional tenets of just good teaching and good classroom management kind of being applied in virtual settings. So I think it's important for us to look for those, see how can we just translate those to virtual settings. Chrissy, what advice are you giving to your teachers?
Yeah, I think that you can't have the social emotional learning aspect and the academic aspect exist unless you have those relationships, like we talked about it at the beginning of our time and throughout this entire panel. And that in the first weeks of school, it's less of, do I need to go all in on academics, or should I start doing all this SEL stuff first? I would say the first priority is actually build relationships, get to know your students, get to know the people that they love and that they are close with and who is there with them in their homes. And from there, then you can kind of get a lay of the land of, like, based off the relationships that I'm building, what I hear students are craving, what I've been learning from parents or those that they live with. Based off of all of that, what might I need to do as an educator in order to do both together? Because to Shayna's point, SEL isn't just a curriculum that you do for 15 minutes. It's embedded into the routine that you build online, how you're asking them to engage in the virtual space. You could just do Padlets upon Padlets for content, or, you know, Flipgrid videos for content, but that's also a really unique way to have, like, build a virtual community. And so you can use these virtual tools in lots of ways to build relationships between the teacher and the student, but then also student to student, because those breakout rooms are only going to be really strong and centered in content if kids feel comfortable working together and with one another. And that is one thing that is different this time of year than back in March, is those relationships, unless a teacher is looping with the same group of students and those students are looping up together, they have to start building all of those new relationships. And so it's going to really require a new emphasis on relationships, definitely.
Thanks, Chrissy. Efrain, we have a question in the Q&A for you. From a school administrator's point of view, what are some tools you've used or could recommend to support teacher mental health?
So for mental health, I'm talking about from the perspective of someone who has PTSD, has a history of addressing this. I feel that it can only make you stronger when you know how you are feeling. I recommend the Mood Meter. It's an app developed by the Center for Emotional Intelligence in Yale University. And it really allows you to track yourself on how you feel throughout the day, throughout the week, depending on how much you want to know about yourself. And as a teacher, if you don't know yourself, if you don't know how you are feeling, if you don't know how to properly label and address your own emotions, then heck, you cannot show this to students. So again, we are in the profession that you are going to get paid to become a better human being, so you can teach others that when you do good things happen. So I know it's anxious to be a first-year teacher. We have been there, but no matter how insecure you might feel, when you're in front of those students via a plastic screen, you are going to be in a better position to support those students regardless of how much background you have. So trust in yourself. Ask your colleagues, go and research what's around and how to engage students again via plastic screens. Another recommendation, Chris Voss, FBI agent, tells you about how to understand the physical significance how students, when they are mad, upset, when they close their eyes, when they sigh, because the more you know about the humanity of your students, the easier it's going to be for you to address them. Think about Freddie Mercury in the concert. He will get in the microphone and he will engage thousands. This is what you do. You're Freddie Mercury getting in the stage. Good luck.
We have a little less than 10 minutes remaining, so I have a couple more questions for our panel, and of course, if any additional questions from the audience come in, we'll read those. But one thing I want to kind of go back to is this idea of like agency at this time. You know, I started off framing this conversation with some of the reality on the ground of the way young people are feeling, and we all feel these challenges in different ways, and there is this sense of urgency to solve the problem, to solve the crisis of the day. But urgency without agency can be problematic. So I would love to hear from each of you. What's something concrete our audience can take away from this conversation? What's a concrete action they can go implement, a move they can make in the classroom, or an insight that will change the way they think? It will help them move forward, give them a sense of agency. And Orrin, I may be curious from your lens, from a research lens, something you would really encourage the audience to think differently about or walk away with.
So interestingly enough, that you brought this notion of agency up, Kevin, because I think, one of the first things that's, I think, important for educators, whether it's teachers or principals, to recognize is that the game has changed in terms of agency, in terms of students, right? So students have a lot more agency, and if spring tells us anything, they're feeling like they can exercise that agency, because you know what? They don't have to get up, suit up, walk, get on a bus, and sit in a classroom because someone said that they had to. So recognize that students actually do have agency, and what you can do to engage that student's agency to show up, to be interested, to engage. And I know, Kevin, that that's not particularly concrete, and yet I think it's applicable across a whole host of different situations, as opposed to something that might be concrete that could work in one place because of the kind of situation that you have, but not in another. So that's what I would offer.
It's an important mindset at this time. Chrissy, one concrete thing we can do to support SEL right now.
Yeah, I've been thinking quite a bit about how SEL has to be taught within the larger political context and at the intersection of equity and anti-racist, culturally responsive practices and all of those things. And I would say that the one thing that is top of mind is that there's a lot that's not going the greatest right now, but SEL it's important to build on student strengths. It is not something that is there to fix students. And so I would say that my concreteness would be to explore the intersection of those things, whether that be through the research behind it or reading about it and applying it in the classroom, but really just making sure that it is centered in strengths.
Shayna, how about from your lens?
I've been struggling with this. It's hard for me to come up with something concrete, but I don't know. I mean, it's consistency, right? So consistent implementation. For me, I think it's more about a mindset of resiliency, both for the student and for the educator, that you need to consistently hit the reset button. That goes back to what I said before, but just remembering that every day is a new day, and that your implementation must be consistent and must be regular, and figuring out how to create spaces where you can do that and allow for student and teacher interaction.
Thanks. And Efrain, from your position.
My recommendation for teachers are to plan the year. Plan the year means that not only what you teach, but it's also what you learn, because you need to spend time in the learning zone. You cannot be a good teacher if you don't learn, right? So I want you for a moment, imagine that you're taking a loved one to a hospital, or you're going with a loved one to a concert or to a game. The expectations are always we never go to a game or to a concert expecting, well, it's gonna be an okay show, right? So we have to be that emergency room physician or that person who's gonna be in the concert. We are the show, right? But for that, we have to take care of ourselves the same way they do, right? And for some reason in pedagogy, we have learned that you have to sacrifice yourself and you're all the time engaged in thinking, and you don't have to live for yourself so you can live for others, right? But those are stories that don't really comfort anyone, because you need to be well rested. You need to be aware of how you are feeling, what you need, right? Maybe it's go get a massage or go for a walk with your dog, or just spend time drawing rocks that you can give away for other people with beautiful signs. The more grateful that you are about what you are, it's going to empower you to serve the populations that you are going to serve. They need a complete you, a full you, a healthy you, and not someone who is going through all the trauma that we see in the media, in the news all the time. If we become startled and we show that to students, that's what students are going to learn. So we need to be the opposite, peace and calm.
Well, I think that brings us to the end, and I think that's a great place to finish this conversation. I think back to that first question I asked to start, and I said, how are you feeling? And you all actually kind of blew me away. You said optimistic, ready, enthusiastic, and eager. So much optimism in this group, and when it's so easy to become pulled into the negativity, reaching for that optimism, finding that joy seems more important than ever. And confident each of you will continue to do that. I want to thank our panel for joining us today. I learned an incredible amount about the role I can play and that each of us can play in these efforts. So again, thank you to Teach for America and Aneesh for inviting us, and of course to everyone who joined this evening.